We will now move to the candidates debate portion of our program, which is jointly sponsored by the City Club of Portland and the League of Women Voters. Presuming we have candidates in our audience today. So I'll continue with my introduction, and with the candidates, David Bragdon and Kate Schiele, please make their way to the podium. I want to welcome all of you. Want to welcome all of our City Club and League members today, as well as representatives of the political campaigns and guests. Guests, we encourage you to join and become part of the dynamic organization that is City Club. I also want to mention that for more information about these candidates and other election issues, you can pick up a copy of the League of Women Voters Nonpartisan Voters Guide from the table in back. Copies are also available at public libraries and bookstores. At our head table today, we now have David Bragdon and Kate Schiele, candidates for Metro President. The debate will have several sections. First, each candidate will give a 3-minute opening statement. A drawing of straws 2 weeks ago determined the order of appearance in this debate. Following the opening statements, candidates will respond to questions from a panel composed of one City Club member and one League member. Our questioners today are Megan Steele from the City Club and Christine Roth from the League. Questions were submitted in advance of the meeting in writing by City Club and League members. A special subcommittee from the co-sponsoring organizations has selected the questions. These are the only questions that will be asked today. There will be no questions from the floor. The candidates have not seen these questions in advance. Each candidate will have 60 seconds to respond to the question. Following each answer, the opposing candidate will have the option of a 45-second rebuttal. Our timer seated in front with our questioner is Sherry Finnegan, Chair of the League of Women Voters of the Columbia River Region. I also want to introduce our distinguished panel of seasoned League and City Club members seated here to the side. This panel will determine whether, in their judgment, the panel questions have indeed been answered by the candidates. If 2 or more of the representatives raise their cards indicating that they feel a question has not been answered, the questioner has the right to restate the question and ask the candidate to reply again. On our panel, we have Frances Storrs, City Club past president, Irene Marvich of the League of Women Voters, Columbia River Region, and Corleen Kraft, Patty Tillett, Chair of the City Club's Program Committee, Following the panel questions, each candidate will have the opportunity to ask 3 questions, cross questions of each other. Following the rotation of candidate questions, each candidate will make a 3-minute closing statement. This meeting is governed by the program format I've just described and by the Roberts Rules and the Rules of Conduct, which are displayed on all of your tables. No hissing, booing, clapping, or name calling will be allowed. Please hold all your applause until the end of the program. No. The program may run about 4 minutes long. We will adjourn by about 1:20 p.m. In the election for Metro President, we have one of the clearest contrasts between candidates in this election season. David Bragdon is known for his support of growth management and transportation alternatives. He has been a transportation analyst at the Port of Portland and a Metro Councilor since 1999. And in those roles, he has been active at the heart of the Portland public policy establishment. In contrast, Kate Schiele brings a background in marketing, media, and political campaigns. Until this runoff election, she was perhaps best known as the candidate associated with an anti-density ballot measure that was generally viewed as directed against Metro's reason for being. In terms of Metro, she is the outsider, offering the promise of a clear change in direction. Today we will learn how these differences between David Bragdon and Kate Schiele are reflected in the candidates' positions on the issues that they debate before us. I would like to ask each candidate to approach the podium, and we'll begin with opening statements. We'll begin with an opening statement from Kate Schiele, followed by David Bragdon.
Hello, I'm Kate Schiele, and I'm a native of the region. I grew up out in Far East Gresham, Boring area, out in the country. I've also lived in suburban Washington County, lived for a brief period of time, about a year, in a downtown Portland loft right on the Max light rail line. And now I live on a larger lot in Southwest Portland. The point of sharing with you my various choices and how I've chosen to live in this region is the incredibly diverse nature of all of our communities and all of our neighborhoods, and that we don't have a cookie cutter approach, and we need to recognize and respect and respond to the needs of each of those individual communities and the realities of what they face as they grow. I want to thank the City Club for hosting this debate today, of which I hope is the first of many open and honest discussions. The host is absolutely correct. David and I present two very differing perspectives and visions for the future of this region. One thing that we do share is that we agree that planning is the best way to achieve the goals of what we all want to preserve and protect. Planning, though, in very different ways. I want to plan the region in a way that is responsive to the needs of the entire region. There has been, in the past, through the state of Oregon, a big debate between rural Oregon and urban Oregon, meaning the Portland metropolitan area. We have more than 50% of the population of the state here in Portland. And I don't think anymore that this is a debate of rural versus urban livability. What we've seen out of the primary results, in a very short 45-day campaign, I stepped out of virtually nowhere into this candidacy and was able to capture the majority of the votes in Clackamas County. I won Washington County, and I won everything east of the 205 freeway in Multnomah County. That, to me, illustrates the fact that it's not a rural-urban divide in the state of Oregon, but rather right here in our very own region, we have an urban-suburban divide. We need to recognize the fact that the Metro's current policies have been polarized to be more responsive to the urban core of Portland and what Portland perceives to be as livable for them, and that is not the same as the communities in the suburban areas of the region, and those areas need to be respected and heard and embraced in the planning process. We need to bring everybody to the table. We need to embrace a diversity of viewpoints, of perspectives, and of solutions to the problems that the region faces as we do continue to grow, because growth is inevitable, and growth is good as long as we responsibly plan for that growth. I'm Kate Schiele, and now it's off to David Bragdon.
Thank you, and welcome to the Oregon Zoo. It's the most popular paid tourist attraction in the state. And it's also one of the economic assets like the Convention Center, Performing Arts Center, Blue Lake Park, the Arlington Landfill, that are managed by your regional government at Metro. Now, this election is about who's going to manage those enterprises for the next 4 years. It's also an election about the future of this region for far beyond the next 4 years. Now, in many respects, our region is the envy of the rest of the nation. You know, particularly over the past 10 years, we have had job growth, we've had economic opportunities that rival what has happened any place else in this country. We have great, strong, safe neighborhoods from Troutdale to Forest Grove. We have access to nature nearby, beautiful landscapes not very far from where we live. And again, you know, until recently, we have a very strong tradition of innovative and progressive government, as well as a very engaged citizenry. Having grown up here, I know those things didn't happen by accident here. They happened because of choices that we've made in the past. But I think we need to be honest as well that right now we're facing some difficult challenges and some choices again. And how we make those choices is really going to determine whether this continues to be the best place in the United States to live. Our economy, which outperformed the rest of the United States for over a decade, is now lagging behind. At the same time, the quality of life that we value so much, clean air, clean water, those are threatened as well. Traffic congestion is getting worse. And our political system often seems like it has been hijacked by narrow interests that are very good at saying what they're against, but don't give us much of a clue about what, if anything, they're for. Well, I think solving those challenges is not easy. But I think it can be done. I think it can be done regionally. I think it needs to be done by bringing a lot of different interests together to make good choices for the future. We've done that before. And in my career, that is exactly what I've done, whether as an executive in the private sector, where I worked for many years to find new markets internationally for Oregon products, or whether as presiding officer of the Metro Council, where I brought some credibility to an organization that 4 years ago was perceived to have very little. So I'm very pleased in this campaign to have the diversity of support that I've already had from mayors, from Gresham and Troutdale on the east to Hillsborough and Forest Grove on the west, from the AFL-CIO and the Associated General Contractors, from the Sierra Club and the home builders. But I would appreciate your support, intend to earn it, through the discussion of the issues this afternoon. Thank you.
We will now move to the debate portion of the program, which consists of questions from our panel. I will turn the program over to the panelists, Megan Steele and Christine Roth. Questioners will ask a question of each candidate in rotation, and each candidate will have 60 seconds to respond. Following each answer, the opposing candidate will have 45 seconds to rebut. The first question of Kate Schiele will come from Megan Steele.
Ms. Schiele, the general public has a limited understanding of Metro's diverse set of responsibilities. What would you do as Metro President to increase citizen understanding of and confidence in Metro?
That's one of the biggest problems, actually, is you're absolutely right. The majority of the public doesn't understand all of Metro's responsibilities. I've often referred to it as stealth government because so many people are so disengaged with the process. That's one of the things that I want to do as Metro Council President is embrace more of the community outreach programs, grow that function of Metro, go out to the communities, embrace the business community, and ask what their real needs are regarding some of the regulatory actions being taken by Metro and how it affects their bottom line. I think that it all comes down to citizen involvement. If you educate the public on what's going on, if you embrace the communities and how they grow and how they develop and what kind of housing needs, transportation needs, urban needs, parks and open spaces they really need, they'll become more engaged in the process and be much more familiar with Metro and how they can impact Metro for the betterment of their community.
Thanks. I think it's a very important challenge, and I think the creation of this new position of Metro President is the opportunity to make Metro add up to more than the sum of its parts, which right now it doesn't. One of the curiosities about it to me is everything that Metro does, generally, does some very popular things. You're sitting in one of them. 5 million people a year use one Metro facility or another. And I think part of the opportunity with this new position is explaining that and engaging with the public as well as with local governments. That's certainly what I've endeavored to do in my time at Metro and work together with them.
Mr. Bragdon, under Metro's new structure, there will be an elected Metro President who will serve as a voting member of the Council and who will appoint a Chief Operating Officer with concurrence of the Metro Council. What will be your leadership style as Metro President, and what characteristics will you be looking for in a new Chief Operating Officer?
Thank you. I think my leadership style, I've certainly tried to demonstrate that over the 4 years that I've been in office. My leadership style is a very inclusive sort of one that involves all the different parties that are involved in the decisions that we're making. I think the decision to change the structure of Metro, which was approved by the voters with Mike Burton's recommendation and the Council's recommendation, is an opportunity to allow the Council, which is a 7-member Council and the President is one of 7 votes there, to make policy while delegating the administration of the agency to a professional. And it would be my intent, if I'm elected to this, to find a nominee for that position with a strong background in management of large enterprises, because that is what Metro is. That we need strong professional management internally, and then the external relationships on the part of the Council.
I agree with David on what type of operating officer is needed to help guide and direct Metro through the future, but as a presiding officer position and the responsibility of deciding where the policy decisions are going to go, setting the agenda for the discussion, I think one of the things that has happened is I don't think that Metro has been an inclusive body of multiple perspectives and varying ideas. I think that it's much more important that going forward in the future that whoever it is, whether it be myself or David, in the process, welcome all varying perspectives to the table so that we can have a healthy, competitive debate for what's in the best interest of the region.
Ms. Schiele, if you are elected, what would you like Metro to look like in 4 years?
Wow. I would like Metro to look more, have much more of a friendly face rather than the 800-pound gorilla. I think that right now Metro has put itself in a position of being regulations on the back of business and a blanket of higher density in our existing neighborhoods and communities. I would like Metro to look more like a partner to the region and one that's much more responsive to the real needs and not just a particular agenda by a few special interest groups.
Well, I think with the new structure, what I would like to lead Metro to become is a more agile, more responsive sort of an organization, probably more customer focused, that the citizens of the region would relate to more readily and realize that so many of the things that perhaps they're taking for granted now, whether it's the recycling services or having a very good parks system, that those are things that they understand don't happen by accident and that they're a product of Metro's involvement in our lives.
Mr. Bragdon, the Clean Water Act requires localities to develop standards to protect wetlands and streams. Metro's response is found in Title III, which requires local governments to establish buffer zones along streams and wetlands. Because each local government's rules are different, many believe we have a patchwork of confusing and sometimes conflicting standards, even as they apply to the same stream or wetland bordered by different jurisdictions. What should Metro do to clarify these conflicting and confusing rules?
Well, obviously the clean water is very important to our quality of life here. It's also obviously have been one of the attractions for the high-tech industry who wants to have clean water. So I think we all share that value. There are different ways to approach it, and certainly Title III, I think, strikes a good balance in trying to craft that and trying to draw some of those distinctions along natural features rather than along jurisdictional bounds. That's the great thing about Metro, is that you can think in terms of the natural landscape instead of some artificial lines that were drawn in the 1850s. So in the case of Title III, which you raised specifically, or some of the other clean water work that we're doing, I've always been an advocate of trying to do these basin by basin, because the Tualatin Basin is different than the Clackamas Basin. There are different ways to approach it in both of those places. And I think the partnerships that we've developed over the last 3 or 4 years bear that out, that we're getting a much better product on the ground with certain standards and enough flexibility for the local governments to meet it.
I think we all want to protect our streams and natural waterways and preserve those natural resources that are so precious to all of us. However, I think that this is an example of the differing philosophies. It's my position that government should first, when wanting to protect some of these natural resources, go toward a cooperative incentive-based program to get residents and the business community to cooperate for the protection of the waterways, rather than regulation first. I think regulation should be used as an absolute last resort, and there's many cases in which personal ponds that people have built in their backyard in very recent years now have a 50-foot buffer zone on them, and it just doesn't make any sense.
Thank you. Ms. Schiele, the Regional Transportation Plan adopted by Metro last year identified $7 billion in needs, but only $3 billion in available funding, leaving a shortfall of $4 billion. What specifically should be done to address this shortfall?
Well, first of all, we hear often from Metro in the media that the reason why so many of our transportation dollars, to the tune of billions, have been spent specifically on light rail and not on many of the road projects desperately needed in the region. The reason why, we are told, is because those dollars are specifically and only for light rail and can't be used on anything else. The reason why that is because that is what Metro has lobbied our congressional delegation to ask for in Washington, D.C. There are various pots of transportation money to be had. When our congressional delegation specifically asks for transit dollars for light rail projects, yes, our hands are cuffed and we're tied up into light rail projects. We need to urge our congressional delegation to ask for more diverse and flexible transportation dollars so that we can fund these road projects.
Thanks. The Regional Transportation Plan that you referenced, the $7 million, includes a vast array of road and street projects, and I support that. I think coming from the transportation industry myself, I understand that unless we invest in the system, and we're under-investing in it now, we are shortchanging the economy for the future, as well as just the quality of life that we have. I think the key to funding those sorts of proposals is by engaging the business community, as we have started to do, build more credibility into the system so people know that their money is going to things that enhance their way of life as well as open up opportunities for the future economy. And if they understand the strategy and understand that they're getting something for their money, then there's a willingness to pay for it. And it's up to government to prove that it is being accountable.
Mr. Bragdon, do you agree or disagree with how Metro has recently prioritized investment in roads versus transit?
Well, there are a lot of different pots of money, obviously, in terms of where funds come from, both some from the federal government, some from the state. I think the community is underinvesting in transportation as a whole because all of these systems need to work together. There are 85,000 people who ride light rail every day. I think that's very positive, not just for those 85,000, but for the other people who have ability to use the roads because of that. So I think the balance has been correct. I think both streets and roads and transit need to be improved, and as I suggested in the earlier question, the way to do that is by being more accountable and more strategic with how we are spending the money.
There is a severe lack of balance in the transportation funding allocations right now. It's wonderful that we have the light rail that we have, and I think that Metro should take a more proactive role with the business community in creating more incentive-based programs to get employers to urge their employees to take mass transit. However, with 98+% of the people using the roads to commute every day, whether it be by car, bus, taxi, we need to invest in more roads and road capacity, period. And not only have we not invested in more roads and road capacity, we've cannibalized the ones that we've had for more bike lanes and planter boxes up and down the streets, which I think is irresponsible.
Ms. Schiele, many think that Metro needs to look beyond its tri-county boundaries to better coordinate transportation and long-range planning with Vancouver and Clark County. Do you agree this is an appropriate role for Metro? And if so, what specific steps would you take as Metro President to accomplish this?
I do think it's appropriate, absolutely, because if we're going to have long-term vision, we can't look at the short-sighted nature of the urban growth boundary because that line moves. How often, how much, who knows, but the line does move. So we absolutely need to look beyond Wilsonville going south and on that I-5 corridor. We need to look to our friends in Clark County and partner with them to build another bridge, not just for passenger vehicles, but for our freight mobility system and for commerce so that our entire region can thrive. Because if Vancouver is a little bit healthier, we're going to be healthier too. The whole region, it needs Metro's role is for regional planning, and we cannot cut off our sites right at the edge of the urban growth boundary and say, sorry, no longer our problem, because in a few years it will be our problem.
Well, for Metro to be successful, it needs to have good relationships with communities throughout the region, and I certainly define the region as including Clark County. And if county lines drawn in the 1850s are somewhat irrelevant to our lives today, so is that state line in many ways. The economy is interdependent, and there are a lot of people moving back and forth. I think relationships are improving. What I've done about it is try to improve the discussions. It really started with the two ports who are very commercially minded and recognize that they're in the Columbia River system together. Going on from that, then this I-5 task force where there's joint members. I think these have all been very positive developments recently, and there's a good spirit of cooperation that we're going to need to perpetuate, and that the next Metro president will definitely need to perpetuate.
Mr. Bragdon, the state mandates that there be sufficient land inside our urban growth boundary to meet the needs for industrial, commercial, and residential use for the next 20 years. Should the UGB be expanded, and if yes, generally where would you expand it and by how much?
The urban growth we're in the middle of an urban growth boundary decision now, and intend to vote on this in December. I intend to vote for something probably quite similar to what the executive officer has recommended, which is a relatively large expansion when we're talking about a 20-year period, and if it's properly planned, I think that's the responsible way to go. I think what is shortchanged in that is the industrial job growth part of the equation that you mentioned. And I think it's really incumbent on the next Metro president to make up for that shortfall. We are going to lose opportunities for economics in the future unless we do that. And so we need to make sure that we are bringing in industrial land and making sure that it's being used for industrial purposes. I think that's a shortfall in the current system.
We have two flags raised here, which means that we have a chance to restate the question and ask David Bragdon to restate it.
Oh, it's about an 18,000 acre expansion that is proposed. A lot of that is in the Damascus area, but there are also portions around the rest of the region, around the rest of the urban growth boundary.
Thank you.
I think we need to take a practical approach to where the expansion is going to occur. There is existing infrastructure in Washington County on secondary lands that are not of prime farm use that we should consider for inclusion in the urban growth boundary. It makes sense, according to LCDC's plan, to direct some of the growth out to Damascus. The infrastructure simply doesn't exist, and those will not be jobs-producing lands immediately, and our economy needs an immediate influx of a boost today. We need to open some of those lands in Washington County and then continue to plan and forecast for the next 10 years and how exactly we're going to invest to make Clackamas County more viable for the region.
Ms. Schiele, Metro's job under its charter is to develop an overall framework and set of goals for regional land use planning. However, local cities and counties are responsible for local planning and land use regulation. How can Metro work with local governments to increase their support for regional goals?
I think that taking a more realistic approach to how many more dwelling units can be forced upon a square acre within each of the communities is one way to build that bridge and to form a stronger partnership. I think that right now what's happening is that the planning process so far has been to preserve everything outside of the urban growth boundary as what's so precious and unique to Oregon and to force higher densities within the urban growth boundary. So we compromise the livability of each of our communities either by selling off parks and open space to high density development or by forcing infill in our existing neighborhoods and communities. I think that's counterproductive to the true livability of the region, and we need to take a more realistic approach to allowing these communities to grow and develop the way they desire to be, because that's why people chose to move there and live there, and then look to expand outside the urban growth boundary in a very planned and appropriate manner.
Well, the question really goes to how Metro works with local governments. Let me tell you how I do it, because I do work with local governments every day, and the region can't be successful unless the individual communities are successful. Individual communities are part of a larger whole, too. The way I've done it, I think one of the things, the blessings we have in this region is some really marvelous local officials, whether it's Mayor Drake in Beaverton or Mayor Lehan in Wilsonville, Mayor Tollifer in Troutdale. I work with those people day after day. Every 2 weeks we have a policy advisory committee, and I think there's a lot of mutual consensus about the regional goals because it can't work any other way. And I think that's the way it makes it happen. I think that's why most of them are supporting my campaign, is because of that working relationship.
Mr. Bragdon, last spring, voters approved Measure 2629, which was aimed at protecting the unique character of existing neighborhoods and ensuring that new neighborhoods are adequately supported by schools, transportation, and parks. Do you think this measure took the right approach in protecting neighborhoods?
I do. I supported that. That was a measure that was referred to the ballot. The primary function of planning needs to be protecting neighborhoods. That's really what it is all about. What the measure actually did was simply put into the charter what was already part of the 2040 concept as well as part of everything that we'd been doing. And so it merely codified what was already happening. The important part about it, too, I think that it was supported by the local mayors who I just referenced. By contrast, there was another measure on the ballot that was, the chief petitioner was my opponent, that purported to provide local control, and that was the whole claim. Yet the 24 mayors, we have 24 cities here, 24 mayors who are Republicans, Democrats, pro-growth, anti-growth, indifferent to Metro, hate Metro, love Metro, have very little in common other than maybe they don't like Iraq, but they did agree, all 24 of them opposed my opponent's measure. They're the people who care about local control the most, and they're opposing a measure that purported to provide local control. So I think the 2629 was a very responsible alternative.
I think that the debate over Measure 2611 versus 2629 is a debate that can be had all unto itself and at a different time, and 45 seconds of rebuttal is simply not enough. But the bottom line is that rather than defend its current position and run a campaign against my measure that was to protect the integrity of our existing neighborhoods and communities, rather than take on that density issue head on, Metro ran away from their own smart growth plan and their own philosophies that have dictated them and guided them through their policymaking decisions, and instead put on a competing ballot measure with a very similar ballot title and proposed to be essentially the same thing, and it wasn't. So we can have that debate later, but I don't think that the support of the mayors was indicative of what the measure was intended to do.
Thank you. Ms. Schiele, as you know, the Oregon Supreme Court has ruled that Measure 7 is unconstitutional. What, if anything, do you think should be done in response?
Measure 7 was passed by over 82% of the voters statewide. I think that what that indicates is a growing frustration with the fact that rather than purchasing property from private property owners, if the government actually wants to protect it and keep it for public benefit, they're regulating people's private property out of use and essentially taking it, but you, property owners, still own the deed to your property, and you're still lucky enough to get to pay property taxes on that property, so there is no taking, and that's a practice that's going about right now, or has been. It's been curtailed a bit. I think that the government needs to be a little bit more responsive to the will of the voter. There was an intention there that property owners be compensated when the government wants to take their land, either completely or partially through regulation. We need to address that problem. I think it's unfortunate that our courts have been skewed and find out far-reaching measures in which to overturn the will of the voters.
I think, with all due respect, I think it was not passed with 82% of the vote. I think it was 54%. But
oh, I'm sorry. I was talking about ballot measure 56, the property rights notification. Okay. Sorry. You're right, David.
Thank you.
56%. Sorry, a majority.
Okay. Do I get my 15 seconds back? Because whatever the figure, it really needs to be taken seriously. And let me give you an example of how I think we are actually, this happened prior to the passage of Measure 7. By the way, I was not part of the 54% or 56% that voted for it, by the way. And I do respect property rights. They're safeguarded in the Constitution. One of the ways we've taken it into account, referencing the earlier question, with Title III, with the water quality regulations, under the Metro regulations, if those are imposed on a tax lot and the value is deprived because of that, the regulations don't apply. And that has that's not just fairness and common sense, but it's also held up in court as reasonable under the Dolan provision. So I think it's a matter of finding that balance and building them in, and without throwing the whole system out, as Measure 7 would have done.
Mr. Bragdon, the Convention Center generates about $422 million worth of business annually, bringing in $13 million in tax revenues from visitors to Portland. The Convention Center will nearly double in size when the current expansion is completed in the spring of 2003. What would you do to bring more business to the Convention Center and to protect it from the effects of economic downturns?
Thank you. I think this is really one of the big success stories of our region, and it's not a coincidence that it was first authorized and built at the depths of the last recession and helped lead the way out of that recession. That tourism is a very important industry for this state, and I think the Convention Center and how it's managed and having it managed professionally is a real important economic asset for the region. And the fact that the lodging industry and the car rental industry have stepped up and they're willing to pay for it. There's not one dime of property tax revenue or general fund money going into that. This is being paid for by the industries that are benefiting most closely. In my view, what needs to happen, the building does not sell itself. The building's going to be a great building. It's got one of the best art collections of any convention center in the country, but it doesn't sell itself. What we're doing is working very closely with POVA, which is a tremendous organization from the industry, working with them, and there is part of the funding package that actually goes into the marketing pot so that we are out there, so that enables POVA to be out there marketing the building. And I think we need to continue doing that. I participate with them when they bring groups in as well.
marketing of the convention center is absolutely going to be the key to its success, as is with anything. You know, if you're going to have, nobody's going to know about it if you don't tell them. So we have to market, we have to attract the trades to want to come to the region. We need to provide the lodging and of course the rental cars, and that's all good. But I do not think necessarily the convention center is a valuable component and a nice amenity to the region. But I don't think that we should be hanging our hat on the expansion of the convention center to bring us out of the recession. I think that our region is looking at much more serious issues regarding land use planning and transportation policy that will have a much larger impact on whether or not we pull ourselves out of this and how successfully we do so.
Ms. Schiele, in 1995, voters enthusiastically adopted a bond measure enabling Metro to purchase nearly 8,000 acres of additional open space. With this additional land, a long-standing problem has become more serious. There is no stable funding source for the operation and maintenance of Metro's parks and open space. What, specifically, do you recommend be done to address this funding problem?
This is where I would look toward business leaders and community leaders throughout the region for suggestion and support on varying ideas of how it can be handled. I don't stand before you today and even begin to think that I have all of the solutions to the problems because I don't even know what all of the questions are. I think an idea off the top of my head would be, and I've thought about this, so this isn't completely off the top of my head. I love our parks and open space. I think we need to protect the ones that are near where we live and work, not the ones out in Banks, 400 acres or so, not the ones far outside the urban growth boundary, but the ones near where we live and work and that we actually can enjoy. I think perhaps working with our high school students, they are required, aren't they, by for graduation requirements to do community service. Get more community service credits, involvement, embrace the community into caring more about their parks that are near their neighborhoods, and they will take care of them, and embrace what's so precious to us.
Thanks. The question referenced a ballot measure in 1995, and the questioner mentioned that it's enabled the agency to purchase nearly 8,000 acres. People may also remember in 1995 the hope was to get 6,000 acres. And through completely a willing seller program, all market-based, it's actually been stretched with the same money to 8,000. My point in that is that's the sort of accountability with money that earns you the chance to do a second round. And I think a second round is overdue, and you use the same principles of showing people what they got for their money. Quite specifically to your question, what I did last year was convene a group that was half local officials who run park systems of their own and half people from neighborhood and conservation groups. And what they put together was a vision. It's the Green Ribbon Vision, which is a $60 million program over a 5-year period for benches, trails, and I'm running out of time. But you get the vision there.
Mr. Bragdon, Metro's mandated planning functions and its central administrative activities are financed from an excise tax on most of Metro's enterprise activities, including solid waste, the convention center, Expo, parks, and the zoo. Do you think these excise taxes are the right way to fund Metro's planning and administrative expenses?
Well, that's a perennial question at Metro, and I think with the compression on property taxes, I think it's the alternative that exists. Let me also say that I don't think Metro needs another dime to do its existing functions. It's a stable source currently because of revisions that we made to how that excise tax on solid waste is calculated, so it no longer fluctuates. This is thanks to Councilor Rod Park 2 years ago. The agency used to spend whatever came in, so if people threw away more stuff, Metro would get more money. Made no sense. Now that is stable, and for our existing functions, I don't think another dime is needed. I think if the voters and the public want us to improve the services, such as we're talking about with the Green Ribbon, then it needs to be supplemented, and that existing source was what the Green Ribbon Committee recommended.
Wow, again, I agree with David. Metro doesn't need another penny to perform its functions. It's a very well-funded agency. And provides many services that we all do enjoy and appreciate. I think that many of Metro's functions need to be streamlined, and when doing so, we can find the money in the budget for parks and for some of these other projects, and perhaps even cut the budget eventually and return some of those funds to the taxpayers.
Thank you. During the next portion of the program, each candidate will ask 3 questions of the other. Questions must be asked in 30 seconds. The responder will have 1 minute, after which the questioner will have the option of a 30-second rebuttal. We will alternate between the candidates and begin with Ms. Schiele. Thank you.
With 98+% of commuters using the roads, cars, buses, and taxis, can you make a commitment to the citizens of this region that if elected Metro President, you would personally lobby our congressional delegation to go and ask for the transportation dollars that are more flexible, that can be used to support and fund the road projects that are so desperately needed in the region?
Thanks. Over the last 10 years, actually, Metro has directed over $1 billion of those federal funds into the roads and street networks. Relatively speaking, that federal pot of flexible money is one of the few flexible sources that we have that can be used for alternatives. There are large pots of money from gas tax and other revenues that go into the roads. Now, those also need to be improved and increased. One of the reasons there haven't been is that folks like Bill Sizemore have opposed increases to the gas tax, which I think is unfortunate. But just building roads has not worked anyplace else. We cannot rely on any one mode. Trying to ease the traffic congestion by expanding the roads is like trying to lose weight by just getting bigger pants. It does not work.
You said that in the paper, and that's the goofiest analogy I've ever heard, David. So then let me ask you this. So then does that mean that if I want to lose weight, I just buy smaller little pants and I'll shrink? Goodness.
Was that question 2?
Then your logic would dictate that if we just get rid of the roads, then we'll get rid of traffic. We need X number of lane capacity per capita, and we need to accommodate that. We haven't expanded Highway 26 in more than 30 years, or Highway 217 in more than 20. Need more roads.
Mr. Bragdon, your first question of Ms. Schiele.
Well, we'll stay on the topic then.
It's my favorite.
Well, you've advocated the West Side bypass. Now,
Yes.
The latest estimates are that that's at least $1 billion.
Okay.
And you've talked about adding lanes to all the freeways. Now, that's what, $6 to $12 million per lane mile.
Okay.
And the Sunrise Freeway that's in the hundreds of millions if they can even acquire the right of way. Mm-hmm. New bridge across the Columbia River, that's probably at least $100 million, right? Mm-hmm. So the question is, how are you going to pay for that plan, and what neighborhoods are you willing to displace for it?
Well, I'm not particularly willing or anxious to displace any neighborhood for any of these expansions. There currently is land directly adjacent to many of these arterials that we're already talking about. It's just a matter of how we're going to use it. For instance, are we going to use that land to expand more light rail tracks, or are we going to use that land directly on the side of the freeway to add additional lane capacity? Simply stating that there is a funding crisis doesn't make the problem of traffic congestion go away. Simply saying that we don't have the money to build the roads, build the bridges, build the highways is not going to help our economy or our freight mobility system or commerce get the goods to market or make this an attractive area of the country for new industry to have the desire to locate and thrive and build our economy. So I think that when it comes to how are we going to pay for this, David, that's a good question. We need to bring everybody to the table. We need to figure it out. We need to, bottom line, figure out where is the money going to come from, because we've got to find it. It's not an option.
Well, I think we do need new streets. We need new roads. We need to also take better care of what we already have. But that can't be the only solution, because other places have tried it and failed. Atlanta added 25% to the lane capacity over the last 10 years, and what happened? The traffic got worse. No surprise there. The other thing is we need to be strategic about where we spend it. And if we spend over $1 billion on a West Side bypass, we can't do the things that really do count, the things that really serve our communities. finally this talk about, well, if we just canceled the bike lanes and the flower planters, the money is not there. Even if you, all the bike lanes in China, even Holland, there is not. There's not $1 billion. Is there?
You're quite the comedian today.
Ms. Schiele, your next question to Mr. Bragdon.
David, on primary election night, you and I had multiple phone conversations, the last of which you said to me that you wished and hoped that we could continue the tenor of our debate as we had in the primary, which was of a very friendly nature. Continue that through the general. In the middle of the summer, you and I made a private pact between the two of us that our philosophical differences are profound enough that the voters would have a clear choice based on the issues. In a fundraising letter, you broke our pact. Will you make a commitment today that you will no longer spread lies about my philosophies and that our race will not be party to negative or dirty campaign tactics?
Sure. Well, I want to thank everybody for being part of our private pact. And I certainly do, I absolutely do reaffirm it in terms of your philosophy. You're doing a very good job of describing it here. I have never tried to mischaracterize it in any way. And I think
yes, you did.
Our backgrounds speak for themselves. I think all that's fair game in terms of experience and philosophy. I think that's what the voters want to have. I think that's a healthy thing. We've continued to have a very cordial.
So you're making me the commitment that no negative campaigning?
Absolutely. I mean,
thank you.
This is all about the issues. That's what I'm here for. I'm not here to have a fight with you.
Good.
This is about the issues.
Huh?
Go ahead with your rebuttal.
David and I have had a very fun time together on the campaign trail. It's been, it has been one of much diversity in our philosophical differences, and it's been a great debate for the region, a very healthy debate, I think, for the region. I just saw in a particular letter that was distributed by you that you put quotes around something that I have never in my life ever made the statement of, and I was very shocked and disappointed and saddened by that move on your campaign. That's all.
Mr. Bragdon, your next question of Ms. Schiele.
Okay, well, if there's anything I've misquoted you, I will take it back.
Well, both the Oregonian and the Trib vindicated me with a correct quote.
Well, the Tribune speaks for itself.
Oh my God, I can't believe you said that.
Let's not tell Rod Monroe we were talking on the phone election night either. My question, it does go to the issues, though, and I think you have been very critical on the issues in terms of how Metro has planned this region over the last 20 years. And I think it's fair to say you've been very critical of Oregon's land use planning system in general. And so my question would be, if this is not a model, if the Portland area is not a model, then what other parts of the country and what policies in other parts of the country would you suggest would be better for us to emulate?
I don't think that I've characterized our land use planning system or been critical of it in its entirety. I think that today, the year 2002, we've come to a place in our economy where we are not completely dependent upon agricultural revenues. Our economy has grown. Our needs have changed. We are a much more diverse economy today. There are many, many different needs throughout the region, and I think that the method in which we've gone about land use planning, we are all for planning. Planning is how we preserve and protect this to be a truly livable region with the natural resources that we all enjoy and appreciate. I think that we've just come to a point, though, in the planning process where we need to revisit. Times change, the economy changes, the scope of the region changes, and we need to take a realistic and recent day approach to that process. Not that it's been broken, but we're at a point where it needs a little tune-up.
Okay, well, I had the impression in the primary election that you were far more critical of Metro and of our planning system in general today. So I'll take the updated view. I personally agree, is our system perfect? Absolutely not. Can it be improved? You bet. And there probably are ideas from other cities that we can import. But I think the way to do that is by trying to be inclusive and work with all the affected groups, not by trashing the whole system and throwing it all out. I think by and large it has served well. It does need some tweaks, and part of the role of this next Metro president is to work through those tweaks.
Ms. Schiele, your last question of Mr. Bragdon.
Yes. As presiding officer of the council, the Metro Auditor did an audit of the Green Spaces acquisition program. When the audit uncovered questionable practices of the acquisition process, your administration's response was to attempt to cut the funding to that department. This has resulted in a fear of retribution approach to Metro rather than a Metro that welcomes constructive criticism to improve its services to the region. I'm assuming that your leadership abilities have grown and matured over the last few years, and I'd like to know how.
Well, nobody wants better audits than I do. I'm notorious for going through the building and finding out what really happens there. In the Green Spaces program, I think it's very important that that money be handled well, and the system that they have of joint appraisals and willing sellers, I think, has by and large worked well. I think the auditor pointed out some proper improvements that have been implemented. Currently, under the current structure, I have to say, I'm not going to put him on the spot, is that Mike Burton is still the manager of the agency and was actually the administrative arm that would have been responsive to that rather than myself on the council. It wasn't the council's role under the current structure.
I'm still curious what your leadership abilities and style will be for the council as the person that's going to guide the region to hopeful economic prosperity and livability for the next 4 years.
Do I get to answer that as well, or is that?
You can have my last 30 seconds. Yeah.
Well, I think my leadership style would be validated by the folks that I've been working with for 4 years, who are, in terms of the other councilors, if that was the point of the question, I think they're supportive of my campaign. The local parks providers, if it's the green spaces issue, I think the leadership style, I think, has earned me their support.
Thank you. And Mr. Bragdon, your last question of Ms. Schiele.
Okay, well, this is I'll stay on the same topic then, because I think that's one of the key differences here. That, you know, over the next 4 years, whoever is the Metro president, with the 6 other members, is going to be called upon to negotiate some pretty delicate management issues, policy sorts of issues. And so my curiosity would be, in terms of your own personal experience, can you name an experience where you went into a situation where there were people of widely divergent views and you brought them together to forge some common sense sort of solution to something?
I've worked with many groups of people over the years on various projects, yes. I think, though, that your point is that for the last 4 years, you know, since a couple of the more hostile members, according to the media, have left the council, and it's the existing council that you guys have right now, it's always a unanimous vote. It's 7 votes vote yes for whatever the project is, and I don't think that's a fair and balanced representation of the desires of all of the various people throughout the region. So I think that as far as what I bring to the table for Metro in that regard and my leadership ability to do this, I understand there needs to be compromise. I understand that it's not going to be my way, because my way may not be the best way. But we need to bring everybody to the table. We need to assess what is the best approach to all of the problems that we face and achieve some compromise, as opposed to everybody just getting along.
Thanks. Well, the question really was, what's in either of our personal backgrounds to validate the claim that we can go in and do these things? And I think on my part, this is what I have been doing, and we've touched on various examples, whether it's bringing folks together on the Green Ribbon Committee, or whether it's crafting the Title III regulations in such a way that we didn't take people's land and tailored something for the Tualatin Basin. All of those are examples of where I have personally stepped in and been involved in crafting those sorts of solutions with people who didn't agree to begin. That really was my question. I can draw on earlier experiences as well.
We will now move to the final portion of the program, 3-minute closing statements from each candidate. The order for closing statements was determined by a drawing of straws earlier this week. We will begin with David Bragdon.
Thank you. Well, those of you who complain about modern politics not giving you meaningful choices anymore, you have come to the right place, because this election, this particular race, offers you a very, very stark choice. It's a choice between 2 candidates. It's a choice between 2 levels of experience. It's a choice between 2 leadership styles. It's all of those things. It's also a choice between 2 philosophies Ultimately, though, it's a choice between two very, very different visions of what this region can and should be like in the future. And not just in January when somebody is sworn in, and not just 4 years from now when the term ends, but 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 40 years from now. That's the kind of choice that we're making with this first election. In the past, this community has made some very wise choices. In the 1960s, the 1970s, this community said, we aren't going to throw away old neighborhoods, we're going to revitalize them, we're going to make our downtown Portland come back. And the result of that is very apparent. It's a downtown, it's neighborhoods, whether in Troutdale or Hillsborough or Forest Grove, that are the envy of the rest of the country. And in the 1980s, during the last recession, we made a conscious choice. We were going to diversify the economy. The results of that were incredible in the 1990s. There was more investment and job opportunity that flowed into this region than virtually any place else on the globe when you measure it in high-tech terms. So those were the choices that we made in the past. But I think most of all, having grown up here, I remember once upon a time, we also decided that the future wasn't just something that just happens to us. It's something that we can shape. And we do that by making good choices together. And we also made a choice that we weren't going to look like every place else in this country with sprawl on the edge and decay in the middle. We made those choices. And we made a choice, and it was approved by the voters, to have a regional government unlike any other to guide us through that future. Well, it is now time to choose again, and it's time to choose the first president of that Metro Council. You have a choice between these candidates. I want to ask you to make the choice in this way. Everybody in this room, whether you moved here from someplace else, you made a conscious choice to move here. If you were born here, at some point in your life, you have made a conscious choice to stay here. Now, I want you to think about the reasons why you made that choice when you choose who you're going to vote for in this campaign. And I'm David Bragdon. I'd appreciate your vote. Thank you.
This is certainly fun and valuable and critical to the future of the region, the two differing philosophies, the fact that the voters do have two clearly distinct options on what vision you embrace, what vision you have for the future of your neighborhood, your business, your community. We are very different. We all did make a choice to stay here or to move here, because it is beautiful. But we cannot continue to try and accommodate more and more people in this small area without planning for the growth. We are growing, and that is good. It's healthy. It's healthy for our economies. It's healthy for our communities. We just need to make sure that we are appropriately and responsibly planning for that growth. We need to elect a Metro president that wants to embrace all varying perspectives, to invite people from all sides of the fence to the table when it comes to a healthy debate. We need somebody that isn't afraid of a little bit of controversy, because you know what? Some constructive criticism is what's going to born the ideas that are going to develop a region that is better for all of us. We need somebody that's going to reach out and embrace the suburban community and bridge that gap between the suburban and urban divide. Because right now, without embracing the desires of Washington and Clackamas counties, Portland and Multnomah County are driving a wedge between a healthy region. Right now, the divide is great. The suburban communities are not happy. You know, downtown absolutely supported David in the primary campaign. They supported him because downtown Portland is not so affected by some of these far-reaching policies of Metro. But the suburban communities who are being affected by the infill and the lack of transportation dollars and the higher density and the higher crime rates and the deterioration of their neighborhoods, those people are not happy with the direction that Metro is taking us into the future. We need somebody that is willing to bridge those gaps, that wants to bring people from the Green Party and the Home Builders Association and the League of Women Voters and everybody to the table to decide what's the best direction for us to go. I'm the type of leader that wants to bring everyone to the table, explore all of the options, all of the ideas. This isn't a battle of experience. David and I both have comparable experience levels and varying capacities. We really do. And it has more to do with, I posed the same question to you that David did. What is the desire that you have for the future of your region? Do you want to fit another 1 million people in the same size box that we have right now, or do we want to plan for the growth? I'm Kate Schiele. I'd appreciate your vote.
Thanks to our candidates for an enlightening debate. Thanks to our co-sponsors for helping to organize this debate. A special thanks to our panelists here, and thanks to all of you for being here and attending. We are adjourned.